In Cleveland, Ohio, the mortgage brokers wouldn't let any opportunity to earn a commission slip away.
They came out to my job. It was a snowy day, and I was told if I wanted the house, I had to sign then there on the spot. So I just signed hurriedly. I was looking for a place for my children and myself, and it was like either you sign or you don't have a home. So I just signed.
My Heavenly Father,
The mortgage brokers which supplied subprime loans to the likes of Eleanor Hall didn't keep those loans on their books. The capital for those loans came from banks on Wall Street, and after the loans had been made, they were sold by the banks at a profit to investors who might be thousands of miles away in Europe or Asia.
The new model says I make the loan, I package it up, I sell it on to somebody else, it's gone as quickly as possible, and there is no ongoing or continuing involvement or relationship or responsibility on behalf of the lending bank.
Every time a mortgage was given, the broker took a commission. Every time those mortgage loans were sold on by the banks that extended the credit, the banks booked a profit. And because the banks had sold the risk of that loan going bad to someone else, there was little proper incentive to impose proper checks that the borrowers really had the means to repay their debts.
Subprime, you go from 4 times income to 8 times income. You go from checking the incomes to not checking the income, from doing proper valuations to using Google Earth and postcodes to value houses, which was done. So everything was driven far too far.
Do you own a house? Are you looking for lower mortgage payments?
Yeah, who can help me with that? Cal can.
There was a torrent of cash for subprime loans thanks to a banking breakthrough called structured finance, which turned risky loans into supposedly safe investments. This is how it works. Here are 3 risky subprime borrowers. And over here are 3 investors who buy investments created from their mortgages. One investor loves risk, one likes a bit of risk, and another hates taking risks and wouldn't normally lend to a subprime borrower. Now here's the great innovation known as structured finance, which persuades the low-risk investor, who controls billions, to lend to our subprime borrowers. I'm a clever banker, well, let's pretend, and I'll mix these 3 mortgage loans together and create 3 new investment opportunities. To Mr. No Risk, the pension fund manager, I promise that he'll get first dibs on whatever cash is received from these 3 borrowers. And because he's getting first dibs on the cash, he thinks the money he's investing or lending is as safe as can be. To Mr. Medium Risk, the investment banker, I promise that he'll get the second bite. And the lover of risk, who runs a hedge fund, she'll get whatever's left over. In the unlikely event all my borrowers pay on time, the 3 investors all do very nicely. If one borrower gets into difficulties, well, we sort of assumed that would happen, and my investors are still pretty happy. But if none of them pay, then they're all facing losses and are pretty upset, especially Mr. No Risk. Many hundreds of billions of dollars of low-quality subprime loans were transformed in this way into investments that were labelled as good quality, and they were sold to investors all over the world.
It was a worldwide phenomenon. This risk really was taken out of Boston, out of Massachusetts, and really spread, almost atomized like a fine mist around the world.
And what was the motivation for selling quite so much debt?
Basically greed, quite frankly. But by repackaging them into these more exotic vehicles, we could then yet again front-load the fees. And I can't stress how important it is. The self-interest being moved forward in this process.
The market was booming. So if you go back to 2006, you'll probably be talking 1.7, 1.8 trillion of market volume. Not only my bank, but many banks, talking about the overall market. That's a significant amount. So everything is positive, bullish, there's fire going on. So the overall market gets into a frenzy.
Most of the world's big banks, from Citigroup and Merrill Lynch in the US to our own Royal Bank of Scotland and Barclays, were stampeding to make profits by turning risky subprime loans into supposedly high-quality investments.
A situation where a guy who's organising bank debt could take home a bonus quite literally 40 times his salary does bias behaviour. The guys wanted to do deals.
Everybody has to get on board or they'll be left behind. They couldn't refuse to play because if they did, they wouldn't have been bankers. The banks would have lost clients and so on. The markets can't help. They have to go to excesses of euphoria and despair.
But the quality of the investments was not what the bankers thought it was, because more of the borrowers defaulted than they expected.
You guys ready? Let's start this. Get this eviction on the roll here.
Sheriff's office.
When I started, we were getting about 12 evictions a week. Now we're getting 90.
Just goes to show you that neighbors are, going through the same sort of problems within weeks of each other, literally.
Subprime borrowers had been lured into taking on their mortgages by special low teaser rates, with neither borrower nor lender worrying enough about what would happen when the low rates came to an end. And when rates rose, well, for many, default was inevitable. At the end of her introductory offer, Eleanor Hall's monthly payments went up by a painful 75%.
I was under the impression that I had a fixed rate of $625 a month. I had no idea that I had a variable rate that would escalate every 3 to 6 months. So my mortgage went from $625 a month to $1,098 a month.
You could borrow 100% of the debt without any questions asked, and with a teaser rate that really got you sucked in. The very word teaser rate gives the game away.
The essence of good banking for millennia, that the lender is supposed to check whether the borrower can actually repay, had been lost.
When I grew up and I looked at banking and was in banking indeed, what used to happen was you went to see a bank manager to borrow money and he lent you the money and made sure that you paid it back, or tried to make sure that you paid it back. As soon as you divorce those two things, you're in trouble.
In the stampede to do deals, banking common sense had been abandoned. But for years the danger was ignored, because all those dodgy loans had been converted into investments that had a AAA rating, which in the past had always meant that they were ultra safe.
When something is rated in the financial community AAA, the assumption of everyone is that it just can't go wrong. In all of my years in finance, which is now getting pretty close to 40 years, I've never seen a AAA default. AAAs don't default. AAAs are like Exxon and Royal Dutch Shell. There are very few AAAs, and they do not default.
But just how impartial were the agencies that awarded these AAA ratings? After all, they were paid by the banks which wanted to sell the investments as AAA.
None of us would hide the fact that we are paid by the issuers of the bonds, and that does create a potential conflict of interest. What we would point out, though, is that we have a number of ways of managing that conflict to ensure the integrity of the work that we do.
But when giving the AAA rating, the agencies didn't actually go back to the subprime borrowers and check that they'd be able to repay their loans.
We do not do underlying due diligence. We do rely on information that's given to us. The investor community was aware of that, or should have been aware of that, because it was public fact.
Eventually, the simplest and oldest financial logic would reassert itself.
The thing people forget about borrowing money is you've got to pay it back. That's a golden rule that I learned at my father's apron. And someday the bank's going to come and say, can I have my money back? And then you say, oh well, it's in this house, which isn't quite valued what I paid for it, and therefore I need to sell it, and therefore, you know, it all unhinges.
The bankers and rating agencies have been too clever for their own good. They based their AAA ratings on historical data. They looked at how many subprime loans had gone bad when the market was tiny and used that information to calculate how many would default as the market grew and grew and grew. It turned out to be a catastrophic error.
The red light was November 06, a bit more than a year ago, when what you call the first pay default, a very important figure, i.e. people who have borrowed and at their first payment, 6 months after borrowing, are not paying the first interest. That's pretty significant. First pay default historically was 1.5%, 1 to 2%. In a matter of a month, that figure jumped to 5–6%. That was a clear sign when you have people not paying that you should be worried.
Default rates were bound to rise as subprime loans shot up from being 1 in every 13 US mortgages in 2001 to 1 in every 4 by 2006.
I received this notice the beginning of September. It was plastered to my door. It was bad enough, it broke me down, but I had to do everything to keep my children in control because I really didn't want them to know what was actually being done.
Eleanor Hall, like thousands of others, can't pay and has been made homeless.
I don't ever see myself owning another home. I just don't see it. I don't trust. I'm always looking over my shoulder. People I thought had my best interest, they was only out for $1.
Here's what really shocked the bankers. Subprime loans were going bad faster than any other kind of loan, in a wholly unprecedented way.
In the past decades, it was always the case that the general population would default on everything else in order to keep their house at default. Credit cards at default on their loan to buy their fridge, they default on their car loans. And then finally they would default on their mortgage. They're keeping their credit card current and they're defaulting on their mortgage first. This has never been seen before.
When the scale of losses from subprime loans could no longer be ignored, the holders of all those AAA investments made out of subprime loans had a horrible awakening. In August 2007, a big French bank, BNP Paribas, sparked a global financial panic when it announced that it couldn't value its holdings of investments created from subprime loans.
When BNP came out with that, you know, this was a moment of saying, it's time to go home. Children, the party's over now.
Banks became reluctant to lend to each other because they weren't sure which of them were holding the subprime poison and whether they would ever get their money back. The multi-trillion-dollar money markets that underpin the global economy seized up.
The speed at which it happened, the way in which financial institutions just, withdrew from the market because they were worried, I think that was unprecedented. And it surprised politicians, it surprised regulators, and certainly surprised the banks. So once you're in that vicious circle, lack of confidence, bit of lack of trust, you don't know who's holding the problem, everybody then, like lemmings, run for cover.